Hey, it's Nathan. Before we start, let me ask you something. If two detectives met you at an airport gate and said you were under arrest for murdering your own daughter, how would you even answer if you've never had a child in your life? That's exactly where today's story begins, and I promise you, where it goes from there is somewhere I've never taken you before. It's about a man who spends his days finding lost family for strangers, and the day he found out his own family had been stolen from him, sold actually, piece by piece, by the person who once promised to love him. It's about DNA, which never lies, and about people who lie with it. And it's about the quietest kind of revenge there is. A man who doesn't scream, doesn't threaten, doesn't run. He just starts pulling one thread, the way he's done 10,000 times before, until an entire empire of secrets comes apart in his hands. Stay with me to the end on this one, because the last thing he writes in a dead girl's notebook is the part I still can't stop thinking about. This is his story. Graham Ryland liked to say that everybody leaves a trail, even the ones who were never allowed to exist on paper. He was 41 years old, and he worked out of a converted sunroom in Norbury, Ohio, under a business name that sounded bigger than it was, Ryland Lineage Forensics. Police departments in 9 states had his number. When a case went cold and all that was left was a droplet of DNA and a family tree with no names on it, Graham was the man who filled in the names. He had identified a Jane Doe who had waited 30 years for her own headstone. He had found a kidnapped boy living under a stranger's surname 2 states from where he was taken. He read electropherograms the way other men read box scores, and he had built his whole quiet life on one belief: blood tells the truth, even when every person around it is lying. The irony of what happened to him still takes my breath away. 15 years earlier, Graham had been married. Her name was Bethany Ferrier, and they had spent 3 brutal years and most of their savings at a fertility clinic called Larchview, trying for a child who never came. 4 rounds, 4 failures. Somewhere in the middle of that grief, the marriage quietly bled to death, and when the divorce was finalized, they signed the standard form directing Larchview to destroy the embryos that remained in storage. Graham signed it in a parking lot on the hood of his car because he couldn't stand to be in the same room with her by then. A month after the papers went through, he found out why the marriage had really died. 11 months of messages between his wife and a man she called L. Not a stranger, Dr. Lionel Gaunt, the silver-haired fertility specialist they had been paying to build their family. The man who had sat across from Graham, shaken his hand, and told him, with the perfect sad smile, that some things simply aren't meant to be. Graham never confronted either of them. He filed it where he filed everything, quietly, and rebuilt alone. He didn't remarry. He didn't have children. That fact matters more than anything else in this story, so hold on to it. On a Tuesday in October, Graham flew to Denver to give the keynote at a forensic genealogy conference and to consult on a decades-old cold case. He left at 6 in the morning, alone, the way he did everything. And 4 days later, when his flight home touched down and he walked up the jet bridge with his laptop bag on his shoulder, 2 Latimer County detectives were standing at the gate with his photograph in their hands. The taller one stepped forward and said the words that ended Graham Ryland's old life in a single sentence: "You're under arrest for the murder of your daughter." He actually laughed, one short, confused breath of a laugh, because it had to be a mistake, some other Ryland, some other flight. "That's insane," he said. "I don't have a daughter." They cuffed him at gate C11 in front of 100 strangers holding up their phones, and the whole drive to the county building he kept waiting for someone to check a file and apologize. Instead, they put him in an interview room, and Detective Imogen Wilkes laid the case out in front of him one folder at a time, watching his face the whole while. A 14-year-old girl named Eden Crowther had been found dead beside the creek path in Hazelmere Park 9 days earlier, on the last night Graham had been in Ohio. Skin cells under her fingernails had produced a clean male DNA profile. The county had run it through the public genealogy databases, the exact investigative technique Graham himself had helped pioneer, and it had led them, allele by allele, to the one man in Ohio whose profile was voluntarily public. A paternal match, statistical certainty, Wilkes said. The victim was his biological child. Then came the rest, an email account, G. Ryland 84, that had been sending the girl messages for a month. "I'm your real father. They stole you. Don't tell your parents." A prepaid phone bought with a card in his name at a gas station 4 minutes from his house. A man in a gray jacket on the park camera, medium build, face never visible, and a 6:10 a.m. flight out of the state the morning after she died, which the prosecutor was already calling flight. Graham kept saying the only true thing he had. I have never had a child. You have the wrong man. So Wilkes slid the last folder across the table and opened it. And that was the moment the room changed forever. The photograph was from the medical examiner. Eden Crowther had auburn hair and his mother's narrow chin, and her left eye. You could see it even in that terrible stillness. Her left eye was two colors at once, green with a wedge of amber at the bottom, like a coin dropped in a pond. Graham had looked at that exact eye in every mirror of his life. His knees went first. The deputies caught him before his head hit the table, and when he could speak again, all that came out was her face. She has my... And he couldn't finish. And here is the detail the county never managed to bury afterward. The detectives went pale too, because every cop in Latimer County knew that girl. Eden Crowther was the only daughter of Carl Crowther, the county's own district attorney. The adoption had been private, sealed, 15 years of birthday photos at the courthouse Christmas party, and the DNA report in Wilkes's hand was now saying, in cold laboratory arithmetic, that the DA's daughter was this stranger's blood. They booked him into the Latimer County Jail an hour later, and I want you to sit where Graham sat that first night, on a steel bunk, doing the math that would not resolve. He had no daughter. The state said he did, and the state had the one kind of evidence he had spent his career telling juries to trust. By morning, he had stopped asking whether the science was wrong. He knew it wasn't, and started asking the only question that mattered. How does a childless man have a 14-year-old child? There was exactly one bridge between his blood and this world, and it was a storage tank at Larchview Fertility Center, and a destruction order he had signed on the hood of a car 15 years ago. That was the first thread. His attorney arrived that afternoon, Blythe Sarrett, silver-haired, 60, a defense lawyer with a reputation for dismantling forensic cases stitch by stitch, hired within hours by a half-dozen detectives from other states who had worked with Graham and refused to believe a word of the charge. At the arraignment, Judge Braswell looked at the DNA report and nearly denied bail outright. Sarrett got it, barely. $750,000, an ankle monitor, and a DA's office that made sure the cameras caught every step of his walkout. Carl Crowther had recused himself publicly, weeping on the courthouse steps for his murdered little girl. Privately, his office was driving the case like a nail. And Graham did the thing that made him Graham. He stopped behaving like a defendant and started behaving like an examiner. Discovery entitled the defense to the raw laboratory file, so he made Sarrett demand all of it. The electropherograms, the bench notes, the quantification data, every machine-generated page. Then he sat at her conference table with a red pencil, on the case of his own life, and within 2 hours, he found what no one else in the county was qualified to see. The profile under Eden's fingernails was too perfect. A struggling victim leaves a mess, her own DNA flooding the sample, the attackers a faint mixed trace underneath. This sample was a pristine, single-source male profile with peak heights so uniform they looked pipetted, sitting on a degradation curve you only get from material that has been frozen and thawed. And on page 41 of the bench notes, the county's own analyst had flagged an anomaly nobody upstairs had wanted to understand. Chemical residue in the extract consistent with cryoprotectant. Glycerol, the stuff laboratories bathe specimens in before they go into long-term cold storage. Graham put down the pencil and said the sentence that reopened everything. This DNA didn't come from my skin, he told Sarrett. It came from a freezer, and I know which one. Sarrett filed nothing at first. A frame this careful meant reach, and reach meant the county courthouse was not neutral ground. So Graham went home to his ankle monitor and did what he does to cold cases. He built the tree. Eden's killer had used the public databases to aim the county at him. Graham used the same databases to aim back. He uploaded the case profile data he was legally entitled to, and started mapping every relative match around Eden Crowther. The paternal side landed on him, as designed, but the maternal side lit up with a cousin cluster he recognized the instant he saw the surnames. Ferrier, his ex-wife's people. He sat very still for a long time, because there was only one thing that meant. Eden had not been made from his stolen sperm and a stranger's egg. Eden was their embryo, his and Bethany's. One of the 4 they had grieved as failures, one of the little frozen possibilities they had signed over for destruction. Somebody at Larchview had taken a dead marriage's leftover children and put one of them into the world without telling either parent. And if they had done it once, Graham pulled every thread in reach for 5 straight days, barely sleeping, and found the pattern that turned a murder case into a conspiracy. Scattered across the consumer databases were other children, born over 2 decades, whose genetic trees pointed at couples who had never had children. And every such couple he could identify had one thing in common: Larchview. He found a boy in Indiana whose matches traced to a couple named Hugh and Noreen Marland, former Larchview patients who had been told their embryos failed. He found a 9-year-old in Kentucky, a 17-year-old in Michigan, 14 anomalies. When he finally stopped counting, 14 children sold out of a freezer to wealthy recipients as premium donor embryos, while the biological parents grieved and signed forms and went on with their broken lives. It even had a market logic: vetted couples, documented health histories, proven genetics. Dr. Lionel Gaunt had been running a boutique, and the inventory was other people's children. Graham took it to the one investigator he trusted with his life, Deshawn, Battle of the State Bureau of Criminal Investigation, the man he'd sat beside for 2 years untangling the Millbrook Jane Doe case. Battle listened for 3 hours, went gray, and said the thing they both already knew. If Larchview sold Eden, then Larchview had every reason on earth to want her digging stopped, and a freezer full of the one substance that could hang her murder on somebody else. Then came the discovery that still breaks my heart to tell you. Wilkes's own file said Eden had mailed a consumer DNA kit in the spring, a genetics unit at school, a 14-year-old's curiosity. The results had quietly blown up her world. No match to Crowther, no match to her mother Elaine, and a stranger's cousins crowding the list. Eden hadn't panicked, and she hadn't gone to her parents. For 5 months, the DA's daughter had conducted her own investigation, because it turned out she was the kind of girl who read case files for fun and wanted to do something with that someday. Her best friend Zoe Winslow told Battle all of it: the notebook Eden carried everywhere, the half-siblings she'd found and messaged, the way she'd called Larchview pretending to be a prospective patient's daughter just to learn how embryo records worked. And then Battle's team subpoenaed her school account, and Graham learned that 3 weeks before she died, Eden Crowther had found him. His public genealogist profile, his conference photo, his contact form. She had written him a message at 11:40 on a school night. "I think you might be my biological father. Your eye is like mine. Please don't tell anyone yet. I want to be sure first." It had been sitting, unread, in an inbox that collected 400 messages a week, page 6, between a podcast invitation and a records request. He had been 40 feet from his daughter's first and only words to him for 3 weeks, and he had never seen them. Graham read that message perhaps 200 times in Sarah's office. Then he folded the printout into his jacket, and from that day forward the case stopped being about clearing his name. The metadata proved he'd never opened it. Proof of no contact, Sarah said. A gift. Graham barely heard her, because the rest of the subpoena return showed what Eden did next. She had emailed Larchview's records department directly, using her real name, asking whether a batch from 2011 under the names Ryland and Ferrier had really been destroyed. 6 days later, a friendly woman from the clinic's patient experience office had called Eden's cell to say a records clerk would be happy to meet her, discreetly, and bring her file. The patient experience office. Graham knew before Battle confirmed it, and I suspect you know too. The woman who ran patient experience at Larchview Fertility Center. The woman who had flagged a 14-year-old's records request to Dr. Lionel Gaunt was Bethany Ferrier. Her own biological daughter had called the clinic, asking to exist, and her mother had handed her to the wolves. Eden never got a file, and there was never a clerk. There was a man in a gray jacket in Hazelmere Park, and I'll leave it there, because some things don't need staging. They need justice. What the conspiracy needed was a story, and Graham was perfect for it. The bitter, childless biofather who found out, stalked her, and snapped. His public DNA made him findable. A thawed vial of him made him placeable. And Bethany made him convictable, because Bethany still had the one thing exes keep. 15 years earlier they had shared a cloud calendar, and Graham, who archived everything and deleted nothing, had never revoked her access. She knew his Denver trip to the minute. The murder happened on the one night he had no alibi. and the frame was airtight because it was built by the only person who still had a key to his life. While Graham was assembling this picture, the conspiracy tried to finish him. A second burner turned up in a storm drain a block from his house, right where an anonymous tip said to look. The DA's office moved to revoke bail. Cable trucks parked on his lawn. DNA doesn't lie, said every Chiron in Ohio. And then, at the bottom of that week, the doorbell rang at Blythe Sarrett's office, and a 61-year-old woman in a raincoat stood holding a tote bag and shaking. Her name was Carol Betts. For 22 years she had been Larchview's senior embryologist, and for most of them she had suspected what the disposal paperwork was hiding. So she had done the one small brave thing available to a frightened person. She had kept her own log, every specimen that left her lab, every discrepancy between the official disposition forms and what actually came out of the tanks, in a green columnar ledger she took home the day she retired. She had stayed silent through years of Gaunt's lawyers and one very specific visit from a man in a gray jacket who knew where her sister lived. Then she watched the news say a genealogist murdered his own stolen daughter, and she couldn't carry it anymore. On the conference table, she opened the ledger to March 2012 and turned it toward Graham. The official file said his and Bethany's remaining embryos were destroyed on the 14th. Carol's neat handwriting said, "Out, LG private transfer, recipient file V9. And on the line below it, a second entry, same batch, 11 months later, recipient file V14. Graham read it twice before it landed. 2 transfers, 2 children. Eden had a full brother somewhere out there, a boy, now 12 years old, and the freezer that had taken his daughter had one more secret with his name on it. Here's the problem they faced, and I love this part, because this is where a quiet man's whole boring, careful life turns out to be a weapon. They couldn't take the ledger to the county. Crowther's fingerprints were all over the case, and a defense-friendly bombshell would be chain of custody to death by Monday. So battle went around the county entirely, to the state attorney general's organized crime section, and together with Sarrett and Graham, they built a trap out of Dr. Lionel Gaunt's one true religion, money. Carol Betts made a phone call to her old boss for the first time in 6 years. She'd been thinking, she said, about her pension and about a couple she'd met, tech money, late 40s, desperate, discreet, the kind who ask no questions and pay for certainty. Gaunt was careful for exactly 9 days. Then greed won, the way it always had, and he invited the couple in after hours. The couple were 2 undercover state agents wearing more electronics than a news van, and Dr. Lionel Gaunt, silver and serene in his consultation suite, gave them the entire business model in 40 minutes. No waiting lists, no donor registries. Fully vetted material, he called it, from proven families, health documented back 3 generations. The source families never know, he said, and the agent's hidden lenses caught the little smile. For $500,000 he offered them his premium line, and then, because the devil loves a callback, he pulled a file and told them this particular genetic line had produced 2 exceptional children already. He was selling Graham's 3rd embryo, the last one. Meanwhile, Bethany walked the couple through what she called discretion protocols, her signature on every form. And in the parking lot across the street, the surveillance team photographed a stocky man in a gray jacket who had followed Carol Betts to the meeting. Dwayne Pember, Larchview's security consultant of 19 years. The AG's people put a warrant on his phone that night. It came back with everything. The gas station burner purchase, cell pings walking Hazelmere Park's creek path in a 2-hour window 9 days apart, a rehearsal, then the night itself, a photograph of Eden leaving her school, and one text message from the good doctor's number that prosecutors would later read aloud, slowly, to a silent courtroom, make it stop, make it point at the father. They took Larchview on a Thursday morning, mid-consultation, agents coming through both doors while Gaunt was actually holding a catalog. He said 4 words, "Call my attorney, please," and never said another. Pember lasted 9 hours. Faced with the phone extraction and a capital specification, he traded the needle for a confession and gave them every detail. How Bethany's flag had gone up the chain, how he'd posed as the records clerk, how the girl had been smarter than all of them. She'd started recording the moment she felt something wrong, and the partial clip her phone auto-uploaded before he found it had been sitting in her cloud account all along. Zoe Winslow was the one who thought to check their shared drive. 14 seconds. A man's voice, low and friendly. "Your father's file is in the van." Wilkes played it once and had to leave the room. The dominoes went down all week. The disposition form with Graham's signature came back from the document examiners as a partial forgery. His real signature harvested from page 1, transplanted onto a version that quietly authorized transfer to research custody. Gaunt's little legal fig leaf. The 2019 complaint Hugh and Noreen Marland had filed, the one that could have unraveled everything 6 years and one child's life earlier, was found in Carl Crowther's office files, personally marked no action. The DA had known his miracle adoption came from Gaunt's freezer. He'd paid $400,000 for her and buried every threat to the paperwork since. And when his daughter was murdered, he had grieved her with one hand and steered her case with the other. Because the alternative was admitting he'd bought a stolen child. He resigned before the indictment beat him to it. And Bethany was arrested at the clinic, at her desk, under the framed mission statement about building families. The text they recovered went back 12 years. She had been Gaunt's partner in both senses long after the affair, on a percentage for every successful placement from what he privately called the ledger lines. Per child. Royalties. When investigators asked her whether she'd understood that V9 was her own daughter, she asked for a lawyer. But it was the older message that told you who she was, sent the week of the frame, when Gaunt worried Graham might be more trouble than a stranger. He does background noise for police departments. He never wanted kids anyway. Let him have this one. The legal ending is the kind you'd want. Every charge against Graham was dismissed with prejudice, and the same judge who had nearly denied him bail apologized from the bench. On the record, Dwayne Pember got life without parole. Dr. Lionel Gaunt was convicted of aggravated murder for hire, racketeering, and 41 counts of fraud. 63 years, which for a man of 59 is a life sentence with extra arithmetic. Carl Crowther took obstruction and evidence tampering, lost his license, and did the thing disgraced men do, wrote a memoir nobody bought. And Bethany Ferrier was sentenced to 22 years, conspiracy, fraud, accessory after the fact. And here is the one moment of that hearing anyone remembers. She turned in the courtroom aisle, in the county jumpsuit, and told Graham she never knew it would go that far, that he had to believe her. Graham looked at her for a long, quiet moment. The man had not raised his voice once in 11 months, and said the only thing he ever said to her again. She had my eye. You never even asked which one. Then he held the door for the bailiff and walked out into the hallway to meet a 12-year-old boy named Harvey Decker. V14 had grown up loved, in Indiana, with 2 parents who'd been told a kind lie and were shattered by the truth behind it. Paul and Susan Decker did the bravest thing in this whole story. They opened the door. No lawyers, no war. A ball game first, then letters. Then a standing Sunday phone call about box scores and, eventually, about a sister Harvey never got to meet. Graham refused to sue for custody, and when a reporter asked why, he said, "Secrets and theft are what was done to my children. I won't do it back." Elaine Crowther asked to see him that winter. She gave him what Eden had hidden under her mattress, the notebook. 50 pages of a 14-year-old's careful, stubborn, brilliant detective work, printouts, timelines, question marks, and a hand-drawn family tree with one square left empty, labeled Dad, with a photocopied conference photo of Graham, paper-clipped to the corner. She was 3 weeks from solving it, Graham said later. She just ran out of help. So he became the help, for everyone else. The settlement money funded a foundation that has since identified all 14 of the Ledger children and audits cryo-storage chains in 6 states. And the statute Ohio passed the following year. Custody receipts for every embryo, criminal liability for falsified disposition, is called Eden's Law. On the 1st of October, Graham drove to Hazelmere Park with Zoe Winslow, and at the little marker by the creek path he left one page, laminated against the rain. Her tree, finished. Every branch filled in, and in the square that had held a question mark, in a forensic examiner's careful block letters, Dad, Graham Ryland. Found you first? No, you found me. Hold that record forever. So that's the story, and here's what I keep circling back to. Everybody in that conspiracy was betting on the same thing, that a quiet man is a weak one. Bethany bet on it when she handed over his calendar. Background noise, she called him. Gaunt bet a murder on it. The DA bet his whole career that a stranger with no family would be easy to bury, because who shows up to fight for a man like that? and every one of them lost, because they misread what quiet is. Graham never once got loud. He got precise. While they manufactured a story, he read bench notes. While they leaked headlines, he built a tree. The loudest thing that man ever did was file paperwork, and it ended 4 careers, emptied a freezer full of stolen futures, and put a law on the books with his daughter's name on it. There's a lesson in that for all of us. Rage is a flare. It burns out in seconds. But patience is a current, and a current always wins against rock. The other thing I can't let go of is Eden herself. 14 years old, lied to by every adult who owed her the truth, and her instinct wasn't to rage or run, it was to investigate, to be sure first. She was her father's daughter down to the last allele, and the 2 best detectives in this story never got to work a single day together. That's the real theft, and no sentence hands it back. If this one got to you like it got to me, pass it on to somebody who thinks the quiet ones aren't dangerous. Take care of your people. Ask the hard questions while there's still time to answer them. And I'll see you in the next one.